Okay, so title says it helps to be well connected. So this is an idea that's going to show up. So you should be looking for this, at least initially. Okay. If there's something else on the way, yeah, you should take account of that, but this is going to be our main thing. That's what the title suggests, right? So with this in mind, you should read, right? Some kind of connection. It's going to be talking about some kind of connection. I don't know when, right? Okay, so it says parasites are everywhere. So of course, this is not about that connection, right? Yet despite this ubiquity, they're not in all places at all times. Okay, so we talked about this before. If we say all, how do you negate all? Is it none? Why didn't you do your homework?
I did.
Why didn't you annotate anything?
Because I was just reading and just got...
Why didn't you annotate anything?
It happens to some sections when I just read it. Just so.
I mean, you shouldn't do that. I mean, why in this class then? What about the other passages? What are you doing?
I just didn't have enough time yesterday.
Why? I mean, you were here.
I went to other hostels right after the math class.
I mean, it takes you like, I mean, it should take you like 40 or 50 minutes to do reading passages.
I arrived at home at like 12, and I had another English class which took about 2 hours.
I mean, why are you here then? I mean, if you're not going to do what I tell you to do, I mean, why didn't you annotate anything? Why? Guys, what are you doing? Why do you sit here then? Like, is that just like a screw you to me? Like, the only people that I can see are you two guys, and you guys don't do anything that I tell you to do. What are you doing? Why wouldn't you do it? Let's take a look at your writing. Let's take a look at your writing workbook. Why wouldn't you annotate anything? Okay, you two go in that room right now and annotate everything. Right now, just go. Do the writing first. Okay. So how do we negate all? Well, who else didn't annotate? Okay. What are you doing?
I didn't so far.
Go. Hey, how is it, how is that possible? How do you get the same score for 3 weeks? Like, I mean, that's exactly why. Let's take a look at your book. I mean, why are you even here? Why are you even here? What is this? What in the world is this? What are you doing? What's your problem? No, answer me. What's your problem? Take your writing book too. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, let's take a look here. How do we negate all? You guys remember this? We talked about this. 100%, right? How do you negate 100%? Do you say 0%? What do we say then? Yeah. Not all. Yeah, just simply not all. And not all is going to qualify as anywhere from 0 to 99, right? So it's saying, yet despite this ubiquity, they're not in all places at all times. So there's some instances where there are not there, right? Okay, so let's take a look. For a particular host site pairing, okay, so we're talking about this, I guess. I still don't know how this connects to the connection idea that's been mentioned. Infections vary greatly over space and time, with some but not all host populations suffering infections in a given year. Okay, so this is kind of like a rephrase. I mean, this was really vague. The second sentence was really vague, but it elaborated on that, right? So some but not all host populations suffering infections in a given year. That's basically what he means by this sentence, right? Okay, so let's take a look. And then it says, what drives this variation? So this is, I guess, a question that we need to initially solve, at least, right? So my thought, though, is, okay, I know we read all the passage, but we read the entire passage. But the answer to this question, like, okay, I swear, when I was reading this, I thought the answer to this was going to be this, right? Connection. What drives this variation? Yeah, I mean, connection. Somehow it has to do, I mean, it's going to connect this idea of connection into this idea, this question. That's probably why it's titled this way. The result or significance probably has to do with that connection. So you can kind of see that coming, okay? So, I mean, it's okay if you don't see that, but, I mean, it's good if you do, right? So, anyway, so we're saying, hey, you know, like some host populations suffer infections, some don't, right? What's the difference? Why? What causes this variation? What drives? So it's asking for a cause and effect, right? This question is important not just because, okay, so we've seen this before. If it says important, right, this question is important not just because, well, what do you think we're going to be talking about after here? How should we annotate this? Yeah, it's an implication. I mean, if you're reading about parasites, host-parasite pairing, and some populations suffer infections, some don't, I'm just wondering, okay, why am I reading this, right? I mean, it needs to kind of elaborate on the significance. I mean, aside from the fact that it's an SAT passage, right? If you're just reading this, you don't see that implication. You don't see that significance, and this is why. I mean, this is the author telling us, okay, this is why it's important, right? Can have major ecological and evolutionary impacts, but also, okay, so it gives us two at least, right? So not just because it can have major ecological and evolutionary impacts. That's probably number one, but also because disease outbreaks can have devastating impacts in agricultural systems. All right, so, and on species of conservation concern. Okay, so this is number two. So we have two implications given here. Okay, so I don't necessarily need to remember this, right? I mean, implication, they don't really test you so hard on this. I mean, if they do ask you later on, I mean, you can come back to it, but you should at least know that okay, it's talking about two implications, right? So these two things, and then we're trying to solve this question. Right? I mean, still, this thing, we're not going to be talking about the implication in the following paragraph. We're probably going to be talking about this question, right? What drives this variation? How come some suffer infections and some don't, right? Okay, so let's go to the next part, and then now I'm in pretty familiar territory, right? What does it say? Long-term, large-scale study of a common weedy plant, PL. Okay, so I guess this is our process, right? So process, and it's fungal pathogen PM. Okay, so we're studying PL and PM, conducted by JJ, right? Okay, so this is the guy doing the study. Involved a small army of about blah, 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 12-year period. So it's all process, right? The pattern revealed by this remarkable effort was surprising. Okay, so here's gonna be our result, right? And then it says the more connected a pea population was to other populations. Okay, here we go. Yeah, it's talking about that connection, right? So the more connected a pea population was to other populations, the less likely it was to be colonized by the fungal pathogen. Okay, so this is a correlation. The result is a correlation, right? So, okay. What am I doing? So the more connected P to other, right? So this, as this goes up, the less likely it's going to be colonized, right? By FP, right? So, okay, so that's what we have. And then it says, this finding seems counterintuitive. Okay. Well, what does it mean? Well, you guys know what intuitive means, right? What does intuitive mean? We talked about intuition. If I go by intuition, it means I'm going by feel, something that just feels natural. I don't know I mean, it's not necessarily that I have a logic behind it, but it's just feel, right? But it says if something is counterintuitive, I mean, if you just think about something, there's a natural, if you go by intuition, it's just a natural way that it would feel, right? But it's saying it's going against that. So it feels kind of weird, right? So that's what it's saying. If all else were equal, the traditional theory for a set of populations linked by migration would predict that being closely connected to other populations should make colonization more likely. So this is the expectation, right? Would predict that being closely connected to other populations should make colonization more likely. But it's going against our expectation. What's our expectation? It's the other way around. If it's more connected, it should be more likely to be colonized, right? So I'm just going to say that's our intuition, right? Our intuition is if it's more connected, it's going to be more likely to be colonized, right? But intuition, or we can say expectation, right? But actually, this is what the reality is, right? So that's an expectation versus reality, right? And then it says, but of course, all else is rarely equal. The apparent discrepancy, okay, so apparent discrepancy, apparent means you see it. Discrepancy means difference, right? So the apparent discrepancy, the difference that you see between theory and the findings, right? So yeah, it's explicitly talking about that expectation versus reality. Can be resolved, okay, so how can we resolve this discrepancy, considering the differences in the average resistance of plants in different populations? Okay, so I guess the answer to this, okay, so we look at this whole thing, and we're just like, why does this happen? You know, why? I mean, we think this is the case, but why is this actually the case? And the answer is resistance, right? I mean, I don't need to understand the entire mechanism. I can just look at the key words, right? So it has to do with resistance, and because of resistance, this is what actually happens, right? All right, so next part it says, Jay showed experimentally that plants from highly connected populations are more resistant to the pathogen than those from less connected populations. Okay, so we have a comparison, right? So if we're more connected, we're more resistant, right? So less connected, less resistant, right? So we have this, right? This higher resistance makes it harder for the pathogen to establish itself in highly connected populations. Okay, so this resistance, it's saying this resistance is the cause, right? Okay, I mean, you don't need to understand what that resistance is. You can just understand it as, okay, there's a factor called R, and this R is what causes connected populations to be more, less infected, right? And then it says, this key finding fits well within a growing body of literature. Okay, it fits well. Well, what does it mean when I say literature? Is it talking about the literature, like the books that we read, like novels and stuff? Is that what it's talking about? I mean, okay, if you say literature, it just refers to something that's written, and if, like in this case, it would be academic papers, right? Growing body of literature, right? So I guess other scientists wrote about this, right? What does that growing body of literature suggest? What do they show? They show that evolution can be rapid and has the potential to profoundly affect ecological dynamics. But the key thing in this sentence is saying, hey, this finding, it's not something very unorthodox, right? It fits well with what we have. It fits well with what other scientists have found, right? That's the thing that you should get out of this sentence, right? You shouldn't be focusing on understanding this, the detail part here, right? the emphasis should be on here, right? It fits well. Okay. All right. So now I'm pretty much done. I mean, in terms of the title, I've exhausted my expectations, right? I know that the title of this passage was about something about connections, and we already talked about that. So I don't know where I'm gonna go from here. So from now, you should be pretty careful. You should look for another rope that you can hang on to and go down. And luckily enough, starting from here, it asks you another question, right? So I guess this is our new question that you can hold on to, right? So what do they ask you? Why are more connected populations more resistant? Okay, so it's just asking us why, yeah? I mean, yeah, the resistant causes the connected populations to be less infected, but why? You know, why is this the case? You know, why the connection here, right? One possible reason, okay, so notice how it said possible reason. So it's not, we don't have a definite answer yet. It's just a hypothesis, I guess, for this guy talking about a possible reason, is that more connected populations are exposed to the pathogen more often, selecting for higher resistance. Okay, so you're just exposed more often, and then you get that higher resistance. Yeah, if you're connected to other ones, if you're connected to other populations, you're gonna be, of course, exposed more, and that's going to resist, and that's going to lead to this, right? But I don't know that for sure, because this is just one possible reason. And then it says, this would maintain high resistance in the highly connected populations, whereas resistance would be lost from the less connected populations because of fitness costs. Okay. So if you have a whereas, you wanna take a look at both parts, right? It wants to talk about two sides of the issue. Okay. So let's take a look again here. So high resistance in the highly connected this would maintain, okay, so this is talking about it being exposed, right? That would maintain high resistance in the highly connected populations, whereas resistance would be lost from the less connected populations because of fitness costs. Okay, do you need to know what this is? No, this is just a new idea, right? So, I mean, you don't necessarily need to understand this, right? It's just like, okay, there's just another factor, right? There's another factor that comes into play, but whatever, right? Anyway, there is some evidence for this in the data. The only low resistance populations are ones with low connectivity. Okay, so this is a result that it presents, and it's kind of emphasized here. So you want to take note of this, but do you guys remember us talking about like unless, without, only if, the only? Okay, so the thing you need to know about only is, okay, I'll just simplify it a lot. Okay, so if I just have the word only, what's going to follow after this is going to be the necessary condition. Okay? But if I use the word the only, then what's going to follow after this is going to be the sufficient condition. Okay? You guys know what I mean when I say necessary and sufficient, right? Necessary, sufficient being this, right? If A, then B. This is our traditional conditional, right? Do you guys remember this? This is the sufficient. This is the necessary, right? This is this, right? If A, then B is this. This is the sufficient. This is the necessary. What can we deduce from this? This, right? If not B, then not A, right? We need this. But if it says the only, okay, If it says the only, what follows right after the only is going to be the sufficient condition. The only low resistance populations, okay, so this is the sufficient, are ones with low connectivity. So it's saying this. Low resistance are ones with low connectivity. So it's this conditional, okay? Okay, it says, however, this explanation would also require highly connected populations to be routinely colonized. Okay, so in order for this to make sense, we need this to happen. This is necessary because it says require. So yeah, this always needs to happen. If this doesn't happen, none of that is going to happen. J's data suggests that this is not the case, although it seems possible that highly susceptible genotypes might become infected and die at a very early stage before those infections can be detected by the annual survey. Okay, so we have a lot of information. This paragraph is really loaded. You should come back to this later and look at the logic carefully. When we're solving the questions, we'll do that. But in here, you should be like, okay, there's way too much because there's other possibilities here, although it seems possible that, right? So it's saying, hey, routinely, we need this. We need RC, routinely colonized. But, you know, this doesn't happen. So in essence, that doesn't happen. But there's some exceptions, right? There's some exceptions where, you know, if blah, 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 something at an early stage, it can possibly work. Okay, so if they ask us a question about this, we'll come back and think deeply about this, okay? Anyway, all right. And then it says further work is thus needed. Okay, so now, again, I'm in familiar territory because this is just going to be an incomplete paragraph, right? Just saying, okay, we need this. Okay, well, now I'm just kind of skimming, right? I don't necessarily need to understand all the science stuff that's happening here unless I see something really out of the ordinary. If it asks us another question or something like that, then, you know, I mean, it might change something, but we're almost done with the passage. So, okay, so we need further work in this system and to determine the drivers of the observed pattern. Knowledge of the mechanism underlying the results will help to predict when similar practices, all right. So it's just, you know, saying, hey, if we have further work, then it's going to help, right? It's going to help. The results of the study suggest that in some cases, fragmentation might increase the likelihood of a population suffering disease outbreaks. So it has a lot of science to it, but you should just label this, okay, so this paragraph is an incomplete paragraph, okay? That's the idea that it wants to talk about. What about the next paragraph? It also remains to be shown. Yeah. Okay, so the last two paragraphs are dedicated to talking about what is that? The incomplete nature of the study. We would need this. We would need the further work here, and then we would need. We need to also show whatever happens here. Okay. All right. So it might seem like there's a lot of gap. Like it might seem like we skipped a lot of stuff, but. We'll see how we'll deal with that, okay, in the questions, okay? So let's take a look at the questions. An important thing to remember is especially when in a science passage, if they present a result or significance in a conditional, right? In a conditional like this, they like to use this a lot. They want you to be able to deduce from this. They want to test if you can say this, right? The contrapositive. Okay, so keep that in mind. In a science passage, if the result is a conditional, or if the significant is a conditional, they will come back and test it. I mean, not always, but they like to do that, and it's one of the harder questions, really hard questions. And they don't have line references for these. They expect you to find it. Well, anyway, let's take a look here. Which statement best identifies one of the author's implicit claims about the relationship between PM and PL? All right, so what kind of question is this? Okay, so this is something that we talked about a long time ago. but I'd be very impressed if you guys know what this is asking. Okay, so this question was pretty hard, no? Why don't you guys close your eyes? Who chose A, B, C, D? Huh, okay. Okay, open your eyes. All right, good. Do you guys remember assumptions? When we talked about assumptions? What was that thing about assumptions? Okay, so it's this. So we talked about 3 different scenarios, okay? So you guys need to remember this because these are gonna be the hardest questions on the test and they're gonna be time sinkers, okay? And these, like even the high scores, they're not supposed to get these questions right. I mean, some do, but even if you do, it's gonna take a lot of your time. But I mean, this was actually a pretty difficult question, but since this is the first question, a lot of people waste a lot of time here. And that can affect you getting to other questions. So you need to remember this, okay? So I said assumptions can be utilized in 3 different ways in a science passage, right? So I can either have an assumption in the passage. Like I can have the word assumption or assumes. Right? You guys remember this? If I have this, you want to take note of that assumption. Whenever you see an assumption in a science passage, that can potentially be tested. Okay? So you want to take note of this. Take note of this, put stars next to it, and so that you can come back to it later. Why? Because with this, they can ask you a question, okay, which of the following could actually weaken the scientist argument? That's going to be the question. The question is going to be a weakened question. And what do you do here? Well, okay, in the relatively easier questions, you're going to have a line reference. You're going to have a line reference question. And so you can, I mean, if you spend enough time on it, you can say, oh, okay, so this was their assumption. And then you can find that in the line reference, like if it says line 3 to 4, and then you can go back. I mean, yeah, but you know, in some of the cases, it's not going to have a line reference. It's just going to straight out ask you which of the following is going to weaken their argument. In that case, you should go back here, right? And how do you weaken a person's argument if you know what their assumption is? You guys remember? Okay, your mom tells you, you should have done your homework. What's her assumption? What? Oh, didn't do my homework. So how would you weaken her argument? Say you did your homework. What am I doing? I'm just negating the assumption. You guys remember this? Okay, you just need to say, hey, this is not the case. Right? That's the first scenario. Okay, you guys need to remember this. Okay? I don't know if you guys if you guys just don't feel like answering, or if you guys really don't remember. But you guys need to remember this, okay? Honestly. Like, I can't emphasize this enough. It will be on the test. It will be. Okay? Chances are there's going to be one of these hard questions. And you will spend a lot of time on it. And you will potentially waste time and get other questions wrong. I mean, you'll run out of time or something like that. Okay. Next scenario. Next scenario is you read the passage. They didn't give you any kind of assumption. Like, the assumption is not explicitly stated. But the question asks you, hey, what was the assumption? What was the assumption that the scientists had? They can ask you that. In this case, what do we need to look for? significance and okay, guys, honestly, this is like a cheat. This is a cheat. It will solve so many difficult questions like it's a piece of cake. Please remember this. Honestly, they never depart from this. Seriously, you guys need to remember this. This is gold. Honestly. Like all the questions, like all the difficult ones, they're going to be this or a conditional, right? Okay, so the assumption, it's going to, okay, so you need to look at the process and you need to look at the significance. Let's say, for example, they asked you about scientist A's. There's a guy named A. This guy is a scientist, right? They asked you about this guy's assumption. What are you going to do? Okay, so you're going to go back to the passage, and I mean, you always box people, like scientists' names, right? So you're going to look for this guy, and then you're going to have a process, and then you're going to have a significance here, right? And then you're going to look at these two things, and you're going to look for a gap in between these two things. Do you guys remember that example? Like, okay, let's say, for example, the process is studying mice. Doesn't matter what. Like, that's all you need to know. Okay, so if you study mice, but they make a conclusion regarding humans, you see a gap here, right? How can you make a conclusion about humans when you actually just performed an experiment on mice? So what's the assumption? The assumption is, okay, so one, it could be just a simple correlation, right? Mice and humans are the same. Mice are humans. Or, it doesn't have to be extreme like that. It can be something like, okay, mice are quite similar to humans genetically, or something like that. Or it can, if we're studying the brains, right? Mice brains, human brains. The structure of mice brains and human brains are quite similar, right? So simply stating that correlation. So that's one option. Another is using a conditional, like a specific conditional, saying if you study mice brains, you can deduce a fact about human brains. Yeah, simple, right? But the third one, it's a more general conditional. General conditional meaning, hey, if you study one species, you can make a conclusion about another species, right? So that all closes the gap. Do you see that? Good? Okay, if you have questions, ask me right now. Okay, now we have our third option. Our third option is you don't have any assumptions in the passage. But when you go to the question, they're going to have a wording like this. Something like most strongly suggest. Or something like reasonably be inferred. Something that suggests a gap. Reasonably be inferred. Whatever this is. And what are they gonna include here? They can include a wording from the process. So let's take this for example. In this scenario, they can ask you something like, what does the author most strongly suggest about mice brains? That process wording, right? Do you see what I mean? Okay, let's take a look at this question. Implicit claims. What's an implicit claim? It's an assumption. Implicit means it's not stated directly, right? What's the definition of an assumption? We talked about this before. What's an assumption? An unstated premise, right? What's a premise? Something that needs to be true in order for that argument to make sense, right? If a premise is false, your argument itself is false, right? But it's unstated. That's what an assumption is. If it's stated, that's not an assumption. If someone explicitly says something, that's not necessarily an assumption, right? It needs to be unsaid. You don't say it, right? That's the idea of an assumption, right? Anyway, so here you should have recognized that it's asking you about an assumption. And what do we have? PM and PL. This is our process wording. Do you know what I mean when I say this is our process wording? This is our process. Do you guys remember this? Right. Okay. So they studied a specific species, right? But, I mean, this you can just use your common sense. What did they make conclusions about? Did they make conclusions specifically restricted to PM and PL? No. They just made a general conclusion about host-parasite pairings, right? I mean, we know, like, the more connected, and then they're less likely to be infected. They talked about that. But was that only restricted to PM and PL? No. But what did they perform the experiment on? Only these species. So what's the assumption? Just right away, C, right? Many fungi related to PM engage in host-parasite pairings when plants related to PL. So obviously it extends beyond their species, right? Do you see that? Okay, do you guys have questions on this? So the wording itself is, I mean, they kind of tweaked it around. But still, it's asking you for that assumption. Okay? Well, this one is easy, right? This one is just causes, right? Drives this variation. What drives this variation? What causes this variation, right? So it's A here. Next one, reasonably be inferred, okay? Reasonably be inferred from the passage. Okay, so if I have a reasonably be inferred, it means I can make a jump a little bit, right? It doesn't need to be like a paraphrasing. It's not direct rephrasing. I can deduce a little bit of information from the passage that a high incidence of parasitic infection in a host species may, okay, so it's talking about the possibility of something happening, right? So a high incidence of parasitic infection. And luckily, I mean, it's pretty specific, right? So what can this cause or something like that? This might promote something, this might impact something, this might pose a threat, this might cause, right? So it's some kind of cause and effect, right? But I guess that cause and effect is not directly mentioned in the passage. That's why it used this wording. That's why they probably used reasonably be inferred, because we can't deduce a direct cause and effect. So the cause and effect is not potentially gonna be, it's potentially not gonna be in the passage. But anyway, you should be able to deduce this. Then what do? Well, we have a line reference question after that. So I'm just going to look for this, okay? So I'm going to look for high incidence of parasitic infection, okay? So high incidence of parasitic infection, and I'm going to just look for this in the answer, in the line references, right? So let's take a look. Okay, so line 2 to 4, I need high parasitic infection, 2 to 4. Infections vary. Okay, I don't know. I don't know anything about what high parasitic infections can yield, what it can cause. I have no idea. So 2 to 4 is out, right? This sentence is just talking about infections vary. Well, yeah, that doesn't tell us anything. So next one, 9 to 11. Disease outbreaks. Huh. Okay. So, well, is it starting here? Disease outbreaks? That's kind of weird. Okay, so you need to actually take a look at this entire sentence though. I mean, I know it's only this part, right? But this question is important. Okay, so this was the implication part. But parasites can have, okay, so it's talking about parasites, right? So potentially, yes, it's talking about the impact of parasitic infections. It can potentially be that. Parasites can have major ecological and evolutionary impacts, but also because disease outbreaks can have devastating impacts on agricultural systems and on species of conservation concern. And then I can remember in the question that I had some wording related to this, threat or something like that, or cause of threat or something like that, right? So potentially I can answer this using agricultural system or species of conservation concern. That can potentially be my answer, right? So that's line 9 to 11. Then I want to take a look at 12 to 17. So if you take a look at 12 to 17, no, this is just process. I can't say anything about high parasitic infection based on this part. What about 17 to 21? The pattern revealed, the more connected, the less likely. Okay, well, this one has nothing to do with the impact that high parasitic infections yield. So our answer is probably going to be agricultural systems or species of conservation concern, right? That should be our answer. So I'm just going to choose B for the line reference. For 46, I'm going to choose B, and then I'm going to go back, and then I'm going to look for agricultural systems or conservation concern, or it can have both, right? Species of conservation concern. This or agricultural system. Well, it's not promote the spread of disease, impact cultivated plants. Well, up till this point, I was like, wait, is it cultivated? So could this be agriculture? But I see this comparison, so I just have no idea why this is here. Pose a distinct threat to species whose population sizes are decreasing. Okay, so this is species of conservation concern. So that's why C is the answer. D, cause the host population to become a fragmented. I have no idea what it means when it says fragmented metapopulation. It's just trying to confuse you. It's just trying to say, I know you're not sure of this passage. Let me try to shake you up with it by introducing a term that, you know, might sound familiar to you, but you don't know what it is, right? Okay, so 47. Why does he use the word large scale and small army? Well, I don't know. Why would he do that? I don't know. I mean, I can kind of guess, but I don't want to force myself to do that because I can potentially make a wrong inference. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this again, right? So these are all his potential goals, right? The author's potential goals are these 4 things. So you're just going to assume that this is his goal. If he wants to talk about his extensive scope, if he wants to talk about the paradoxical objective, will that justify the use of these words? That's the question that you should ask yourself, okay? So if he wants to talk about an extensive scope meaning, yeah, the scale was really big. Would you use these words? Yeah, I would. If I want to talk about an extensive scope, like I don't even need to go back to the passage. If I want to talk about an extensive scope, yeah, these army, like to perform an experiment, have an army to perform an experiment large scale, yeah, that would underline the fact that it's an extensive scope. If you want to talk about goals, why would you use these words? If you want to talk about unwieldy, okay, what does unwieldy mean? Wield means to use, right? Or to hold, something like that. I mean, literally it means hold, but to use. Like, so not usable methods, but I mean, no, it wasn't that. I mean, if you want to suggest this, you wouldn't use these words. Scientific importance. If you want to talk about why something is important, would you use the word army? I mean, that goes against common sense, right? So it would be A. Okay, so here, which statement best summarizes his findings on the relationship? Okay, so you just need to look at the results, but this one well, yeah, you're just looking at the results, right? Summarizes his findings on the relationship between the connectivity and their infection. And this was pretty simple, right? The more connected you are, right? The more connected you are, the less likely you are to be colonized, right? And also, he had a comparison. He had a comparison. If you're less connected, then you're more likely to be colonized or something like that. So let's take a look. A says, populations with higher connectivity. Yeah, this is something we talked about. Were less likely to be colonized. There we go. By powdery mildew than populations with lower. Yeah, this is exactly it. Okay, so after just reading A, you should be sure that it's A. I mean, because this is exactly what we talked about. Okay, I mean, yeah, you can take a look at B, C, D, but I mean, you should be pretty sure of this because this was a real central part of the passage, and you should remember that. Okay, this one. Can reasonably be inferred from the passage. Okay, so again, reasonably be inferred. So I don't know if it's going to be direct rephrasing. It could be a little bit of a logical, there could be a little bit of a logical gap. But anyway, from the passage that the author views the results of the study conducted by J as, okay, so this is asking us, hey, what does the author think about this study, right? I don't know. Okay, so the worst thing that you could do is go back to the passage here, okay? At least go back to the passage after you're done reading this, okay? So let's just take a look. Okay, so persuasive, I mean, I don't know, potentially, I have no idea. Striking, I don't know, potentially. This one is gone for sure. We had no, we had no suggestion of controversy in this passage. So this one, you can get rid of. Groundbreaking, maybe. I mean, he talked about implications and stuff, so it could potentially be groundbreaking. So now you want to read, after you get rid of C, now you want to read, right? Okay, so persuasive, because the results conform to accepted standards for scientific validity. Huh. Okay, well, oh, sorry. Almost got this wrong. Oh, who chose A? Who chose A? Okay. So if you chose A, you chose this because, oh, this fits well into a growing body of literature. Is that why you chose this? Growing body of literature? That's not exactly what A is saying. You can be a little bit confused. Why? Because the results conform to accepted standards? Do you know anything about standards? What standards for scientific validity? In order for a scientific study to be valid, you need to conduct an experiment like at least 4 times. Let's say, for example, we have that standard. We didn't talk anything about that, about standards, right? So you might be tricked, right? Because you recall that, oh, it fits well into the growing body of literature bit, but it's not talking about that, right? We never talked about standards. Striking, because the results initially appear to contradict established scientific opinion. There we go. Goes against our intuition, right? That expectation versus reality, you should remember that. It's not there just for no reason. They could, whenever you have an expectation versus reality, they like to ask you about this. So it should be B, right? Groundbreaking, I guess, okay, well, because the results were obtained using an no, it was not an innovative method. I mean, if it said groundbreaking and it talked about the implications, you know, we had implications about agricultural systems, blah, 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 species of conservation concern. If it talked about that, I would have at least considered it, but it's not here. Right? Which choice best explains why periodic infection by a parasite might fail to be detected? Okay, might fail to be detected. So, might fail to be detected. So a reason why a parasite might fail to be detected, okay? So you just need to go to every line and you just need to find this exact thing. Why could it potentially fail to be detected? Okay, so what about 28 to 31? 28 to 31, okay, apparent discrepancy. No, this is talking about that expectation versus reality, right? So it's not talking about anything failing to be detected. So of course this is not the answer. Next one. 31 to what? Okay. 31. Jay showed experimentally that plants from highly connected populations are more resistant to the pathogen. Well, I'm not talking about detecting anything. Failed to be detected, I still don't see that. What's the next one? 42, 44. One possible reason is that more connected populations are exposed more often. Okay, well, no. I still need to get detect, and like this idea needs to be present. Like literally it needs to be present. I'm not looking for the evidence for this, by the way. I need, like literally I need this wording itself, right? Or a rephrase version of that. So next bit. What's the next one? 54, 57. Yeah. You have this. Right? They might die early. They might die so early they fail to be detected, right? So that's why it's D, okay? I want you guys to close your eyes. Anybody get this question wrong? This question that we just did. The line reference question. Okay, if you got this question wrong, you don't, okay, open your eyes. If you got this question wrong, no offense, you don't know how to do line reference questions. Okay? You're thinking backwards. I mean, you're not looking for evidence. Guys, no one asks you to look for evidence. You're not thinking when you're doing line reference questions. You're locating. Line reference questions are locating the words. Okay? Literally. Like, we talked about this before, right? Do I need to do this again? Michael is intelligent. He got a 1600 on the SAT. Do you guys remember that? You guys are going for the 1600. Like when you chose intelligent as an answer, you want to look for smart, literally, something that you can rephrase. You're not looking for supporting evidence for that. Okay? So keep that in mind. Line reference questions, it's a locating question. You're not thinking when you're locating line reference. If you start thinking, you will get it wrong. Okay? '51. Passage indicates that one characteristic of the metapopulation studied by Jay was that. Okay, so if you got this question right, you should be a little bit proud of yourself. Oh, wait. Okay, so close your eyes. Who chose A here? B, C, D. Okay, let's take a look. All right, so notice that it's talking about like many, all, none, most. This is why I talked about this, you guys. All. I said if you negate all, it's going to be not all, blah, 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 stuff like that, right? What does most mean, by the way? Most? No. Needs to be more than 50%. Okay? If it's 50%, you can't say most. You can't. Okay? If it's 50.1%, yes, you can say most. Okay? So the moment it goes over 50%, it's a most. Okay? So how do you negate most? 50% or less, right? Good? What about some? Some can be anything, right? Some can, some can refer to, some could be most. And most could be some. Like, you know what I mean? Like, some is really, it could refer to anything. Anyway, so it's talking about highly connected populations, blah, 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 immune. Many of its less connected populations demonstrate high resistance. What in the world is this talking about? Okay, so which part do you need to go back to? Well, this was the thing that I was talking about, conditional. This question is asking about that conditional. Because seemingly, okay, what the conclusion that you should come to is this. Okay, so if you start reading the answer choices, right? One characteristic of the meta population. So this is a rather general question, right? And it does not have a line reference, right? Does not have a line reference and it's pretty general. Then you should be thinking, okay, this is pretty hard. And if you look at the answer choices, they sound really specific. General question, but the answer sounds really specific. I have no idea where to look. Then you should always go to the conditionals, okay? So the conditionals. So it's actually that statement that we talked about, the only, the sentence that started with the only. Okay, so it says here, the only low resistant populations are ones with low connectivity, right? Low resistance. Let's write this conditional down. The only low resistance populations are ones with low connectivity. So what's going to be our answer? Not low connectivity, not low resistance. In other words, high connectivity, high resistance. I don't know. Something like this. Okay, so let's take a look. All of its, so A says, all of its highly connected populations were immune. Well, we can't say anything about immune, right? That's too much, right? I mean, the resistance would go up, but we didn't say anything about immune. Immune would be completely impervious to that. B would be many of its less connected populations. Many of its less connected populations, okay, so less connected populations demonstrated high resistance. No, right? I mean, this is just opposite of what we know, right? None of its highly connected populations, okay, so if it's highly connected, none of its highly connected populations possessed low resistance. Do you see this? So if it's a highly connected populations, it's saying this is not low resistance, right? So in other words, it will be this. In other words, it will be this. Well, I mean, if you can't get this formal logic straight, it's not okay, but it's still okay. Why? Because all the other answer choices, it's talking about most and many. Can't really do that, right? Do you guys know what this means? Yes, good? Okay. And 52, pretty simple, right? Last paragraph. What is this? A, right? Because it's an incomplete paragraph. Okay, any questions on this passage? Usually if you have okay, so this doesn't apply to everyone, okay? But if your score is, I feel like something like this, combined, reading and writing combined, okay? This and up, so if you're more than this, if you come across a very information-heavy science passage, you can kind of work backwards now. What does that mean? Working backwards means you skip a lot of information in the really information-heavy science passages. And because you don't know which idea is going to be tested. You account for the ideas, but this is an option that I'm just giving you. You can experiment with it, but I'm not necessarily saying do this because everyone's pretty different. So you can kind of, instead of spending, both methods are good. You can account for every single idea and you can get the logic straight when you're reading the passage and then breeze through the questions. That can work. Or you can spend less time on the passage and then once you identify the questions, you can go back and spend more time. But I always prefer to look at the passage in great detail. Unless it's like a second or third passage, right? Like this passage would be one of the harder science passages. Okay, let's take a break. Okay, if you didn't do it, go to the other room, do it. Why would you not do it? Like I told you yesterday to do it. Okay, let's go over the writing questions. Yeah. So questions? Hmm? Number 5. 2 and 4. 28 should be here, right? Number 10. 21. 41. Okay. 20. That's it? Okay, let's take a look at number 2. When it asks you about the style and tone, the first thing that you should think about is informal versus formal. Colloquial and written language is different. So I want to get rid of this. Closing the door on, right? So this one you shouldn't really think about. So, okay, annihilating, eliminating, ousting. Okay, well, kind of, I guess they get the meaning across. Let's take a look. Okay, so let's look at what the subject is going to be. It also enhances. Okay, so what does it refer to? Compost, right? It's talking about compost, and compost enhances soil texture, encouraging healthy. Okay, so here you see this, right? Okay, so these are the words that we're using: encouraging, minimizing, right? Okay, so annihilating sounds a little bit too much. Like it's too much, right? I mean, annihilate is to destroy something, right? I mean, you could just say eliminating, right? And same for ousting. Like this is to get rid of something. But here, I mean, the words that are used: encourage, enhance, minimize, eliminate goes along with it the best, right? Has a rather detached, clinical tone to it. Okay, let's take a look at this one. So the first thing that you should see is I see a lot of parentheses, and I see one here also, which means that I need to at least have a parenthesis here. So it's either going to be B or D, right? But what happens with D though? I have a semicolon here, which means that after the semicolon, I need a subject and a verb. Okay, can be, okay, that's fine. Now you need to take a look at the meaning though. If you think about which is actually going to modify what comes before this. So if I start like a brand new sentence after a semicolon here, that wouldn't make any sense. I would need this which to modify what comes before this. So that's why you would go with B. Okay, let me take a look. Okay, for sentence structure questions, you need to do the subject, verb, and conjunctions. Go. Writer wants to include information from the graph. Okay, well, so we're going to look at the graph, but before we look at the graph, it needs to be true, right? That's the first thing that you should check for. If it's false, well, no. But also you need to look at the passage, right? According to EPA, over blank, okay, ended up in U.S. landfills in 2009. Okay, so I guess this is what we're looking at in the graph, right? 2009. Right? I guess that's what we need to look for. Oh, that's the entire thing. So so you would need to take a look at. Wait, just a second. Okay, so I guess the reason why you were confused, whoever asked this question, is because you just looked at the graph and you saw a lot of answer choices that were just true according to the graph. But what you need to take into account is, when it's talking about compost, and compost means I mean, like you need to be reading the passage while you're going along. So if you're asking this question, it means you weren't taking a look at the passage as you were going along. So here it says, most people think of banana peels, eggshells, and blah, blah, blah as waste, but this is actually a valuable resource, right? So that was the argument that we were going for. So here, when we come to number 5, you need to actually match this, consistent with the description of compost in the passage. So I don't necessarily need to talk about metal. I don't necessarily need to talk about rubber and leather. I don't need to talk about textiles. I should be talking about food waste. And you just want to go to the graph and confirm that this is true. 33 million tons of food waste. So let's see if that's true. Yeah, it's the first column, right? So it should be true. So that's the answer. Okay, 10. Effective transition from the previous paragraph. Okay, so let's take a look at the previous paragraph first. Does the previous paragraph start here? Okay. So let's take a look. So we do have the potential uses, but most of this waste is wasted, right? So that's a problem. And it says EPA over, it's this food waste is all wasted and blah, blah, blah. And then remarkably, so this should also be food, right? So for number 6, it would be C, right? So more food waste was discarded in landfills in that year than any other substance, including plastics or paper. And Even worse, the squandering of this, squandering means you're wasting it, right? So we're wasting all these resources, the fact that compost landfills cannot break down due to the lack of necessary air and moisture. Okay, so these are all the problems that it presents, right? So we're wasting this waste, right? This food waste. We can put it into good use, but we're wasting this, right? So that's the, and then it says, as a result, organic material sent to landfills, and they release methane, a very potent greenhouse gas. So this is also a problem. So we're talking about all the different problems, right? So after the problems, we go to the next part, right? But you don't want to read this just yet, right? Yeah, you don't want to read this. You want to start reading from here. Cities such as San Francisco and Seattle have instituted mandatory composting laws requiring individuals and businesses to use separate bins for compostable waste. Okay, so they're doing something about this. So this is offering some kind of solution. They're taking action on their part to provide a solution for this problem. Okay, so before this paragraph, we had the problems. And then after that, we have that kind of a solution. So what would that transition be? That's the question. Okay, so A says, while composting can sometimes lead to accidental pollution. Okay, so this is just not a subject that's been discussed. We weren't talking about accidental pollution. We were just talking about all the problems that we're wasting food waste. We shouldn't be wasting this. We can put good use to this. B, government regulations vary. Okay, well, whoever asked this question, I guess, actually, okay. Anyway, let's take a look at C. Armed with these facts. Okay, so yeah, armed with these facts being like they're wasting all of this waste, right? And this could potentially be a problem, and they took action. So this one is okay. Mindful of this setback. Okay, so what's a setback? What? Progress? What? Yeah, so you're trying to make progress, but if you face a setback, it's like, oh, you know, like, oh, if you face a setback, it's like, you're working towards your goal, but you're set back, right? But we didn't have that progress to begin with. So rather than D, I would go with C, but I guess the issue is B and C. So if you were confused with B, you were only taking into consideration what happens after this paragraph. I mean, after the sentence. But since it asked you to provide a transition from the previous paragraph, you also need to mention what was happening before this paragraph. So if I'm choosing between these two answers, I would go with C. Okay, so you guys remember this, number 16, when I want to say, okay, so like we talked about like classes, like you take this many classes, but you wanna tell me that some of the classes that you take are math classes. You can write this like this, like you can say I take many classes, okay? But can you modify this using a which if you want to get this point across? Well, you can't, because if I do this, then it would be modifying all of the classes. So what do I need to do here? I need to say that some of which are math classes. I mean, and we can do that for people also. So two dancers, and then both of which, okay, so if you were confused with this question, try plugging it in, okay? So I mean, this one sticks out to me. Why? Because we already have a subject and verb here, but if we use both here, that's also going to be a subject and a verb, which is going to be a run-on sentence. So B is out. Both of them, same thing, same thing as D, right? So if we say both of them, then that's also going to be subject verb, comma, subject verb, right? So that's why C is wrong. Of which, okay, so if we're saying of which, we don't necessarily need this comma. But anyway, why use which when you're trying to modify people? So I would go with this, right? So both of whom. I said this is an exception, right? You remember when we were talking about who versus whom? I said whatever, I mean, if you have a verb right after this, you should go with who. But the exception is when you're using it like this, right? All of whom, most of whom, and then you can use a verb. It's okay when you're using whom like that. Okay, so A is the answer here. 21. What kind of question is this? Can someone tell me what question this is? Yeah, it's a modifier question. How? I mean, it should be easy to spot. Okay, I guess they're trying to trick you with this the, right? It seems pretty obvious if the underlined bit is this whole thing right after this verb ing. It makes it pretty obvious. But usually, I mean, you're going to get a lot of these questions. You should be able to identify these consistently. Okay, so if you have a verb ing, I mean, whatever that's going to be approaching a doorway is going to be the first noun that comes after this. So, can the lion's teeth approach a doorway? Is that what it's talking about? Like the teeth is approaching a doorway? No, that doesn't make any sense. If it's a lion, that makes sense. If it's an envelope, that doesn't make any sense. Same for teeth. So the only thing that makes sense is this. So you don't need to read any of these. Like you just need to look at the nouns that come in front for the front modifier questions. So B is the right answer. Okay, so this is about court reporting, humans versus machines. Okay, so this one is, again, this is a word choice tone question. So super rigorous, would you ever say that in an SAT writing passage? No, this is way too colloquial. Spot on, yeah, same, too colloquial. What about intense, right? This one is just, you know, I mean, this is how you guys use the word intense. Oh, yeah, I mean, maybe not you guys, but like some of your friends. Oh, that's so intense, man. You know, I mean, no. Who takes intense notes, right? It doesn't make any sense. It's trying to trick you into thinking that. So scrupulous, meticulous, something like scrupulous, meticulous, and really careful and flawless notes. That's what scrupulous would mean here. Okay, 28. All right, so sentence 6. So we're sentence 6. Okay, so if you see sentence 6, this one has a transition word to it. So whatever that's going to precede this sentence is in a contrast relationship with this sentence. Okay, so let's take a look what this sentence is. With the rise of high quality recording technology, reliance on court reporters is decreasing. Reliance on court reporters decreasing, right? Okay, so I don't see any like compressive nouns or pronouns, but I do see this transition, and I guess that's what's going to solve this problem, right? So whatever that's going to follow before this needs to be in a contrast relationship with this idea. Reliance on court reporters decreasing, right? Needs to be in a contrast relationship with that. Okay, so let's take a look here. So court reporters record the spoken word in real time. Okay, so it's talking about court reporters, right? And they record spoken word. Most commonly using the technique of stenography, and then we go about this idea. So this is a technique, right? Allows a person to type about 200 words per minute. So this is just explaining stenotype machine. So I mean, that's, so after sentence one, I can't put this sentence. I know that this is not the answer. Why? Because I mean, it connects, right? You introduce the idea of stenography and then you define it, right? Stenotype machine, blah, blah, blah. And then the typed words are instantaneously translated. Okay, so typed words translated onto a computer screen for the judge to view, and the transcript is used later by people. Okay, so it's talking about its usage, right? So how they utilize this. Type words translated, and then the judge can view it, and then you can use it later, right? Okay, such as blah, blah, blah. And then sentence 4 says, digital audio recording is becoming increasingly popular. So you should spot this discrepancy. So we were talking about court reporters and their technique, right? Their method. But right here, you see that sudden transition. Now, all of a sudden, we're talking about digital audio recording. So it should be a little bit jarring, right? We jump to another topic really quick. Something that's opposed. I mean, these two things, I guess they're different. I mean, different now. So with this sentence introducing the technology, like rise of high quality recording technology and stuff like that, it feels like it should go here. So it should be after sentence 3, right? So C is the right answer. Okay, 29. So this is, you need to look at the sentence structure here, right? You need to look at the sentence structure, but if you take a look, okay, so such that, and then a dash, which is, their opinion is. So I mean, these are pretty similar in meaning, and I feel like, you know, as long as we have a noun here that's going to follow after this, which we do, right? I mean, these are all going to be grammatically correct. So what do I want to check for first? I want to look at the shortest one first. I want to look at the shortest choice first and see if that's grammatically correct. If that's okay, then I can just go with that, which would be this one, right? Champions of court reporting, though, argue. Okay, so argue the opposite, and then imagine we have a dash here. That with the increased, okay, so argue the opposite, and I mean the dash can be used, like we said, in two different ways, right? Colon, semicolon, and then comma splice, right? Or a little bit more of a lenient comma splice. But of course, it's not going to be disused because we only have one. So what we need to check is, do we have a full sentence before this? Argue the opposite. Yeah, that's a full sentence, right? Champions argue the opposite. That's fine. So what can come after it? Okay, that with the increase, blah, 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 errors actually increase. Yeah, this is okay. You can do this. Okay, you can have that noun phrase after a dash. So it works. It's okay. You can do that. This is also grammatically correct. Their opinion is that with the increase, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but this one has too many clauses if you do this. And same for this one. It's also starting like a relative clause, which is that, yeah, you can do that. So grammatically, they're correct. Grammatically, it's okay. But I would prefer something more concise here. Best supporting example for the main idea of the paragraph, so you need to look at the entire paragraph. Wait, why is it so long? Is this the beginning? Is this the entire paragraph? Huh? From champions. Okay, let's take a look here. Okay, champions of court. What does champion mean? What does it mean to champion something? Have you guys seen Game of Thrones? No? Okay, fine. What does champion mean? If you champion something, it means you defend something, right? It can be used as a verb also. But here, yeah, so champions of court reporting. So who are these people? The proponents, the defenders of court reporting. They want court reporting to happen, right? Argue the opposite. They argue that with the increased reliance on technology, errors increase, right? So this is what these people, right? They argue. They argue technology, with technology, errors can actually increase. And then it says, because digital systems record, they cannot discern. Okay, so it's talking about the cons of technology, right? The downside of tech, right? And then it says a digital device does, a digital device does indeed record everything, but that includes loud noises. Okay, so still we're going on about this, the downside of technology. At the very end, though, we see a court reporter, on the other hand, however, right, can distinguish between the words and the sounds, extrinsic noises that need not be recorded. So now what are we talking about? Now we're talking about it's a comparison. So this paragraph is a long comparison, and it's saying, okay, so we have all these downsides to tech, but these downsides to tech can be addressed if we have a court reporter, if we have a person there. These can be solved. So this is better. That's what it kind of implies. If a witness mumbles, a human court reporter can pause court proceedings to ask. Okay, so. These are all details, detailed descriptions of what they can do better, what court reporters can do better. And then it says, in some cases, digital recording. Okay, so and then now we do this, right? All right. So the main idea is technology sucks. Court reporters are better, right? I just want to check here just so I don't have any kind of reversal here. Increasing use of technology is a transition from accurate records to adequate records. Right, yeah, so instead of having accurate, it's adequate. Adequate is not desirable. So that's that entire paragraph. So this entire paragraph is talking about technology sucks, court reporters are better. So I want to get another supporting example that digital recording sucks. That's what I want. Okay, so A says makes it necessary for the judge to make additional announcements. Okay, so this could be a downside. So initially, that's what you can think. Okay, so this can also be a downside, right? Makes it necessary for the judge has more work to do. So I guess that can be a downside. So you can say yes to this. What about B? Requires a courtroom monitor to ensure the equipment is functioning properly. Okay, this can also be a downside. What about this? C, leads to changes in the roles and duties of several members of the courtroom staff. This can also be a downside. D, has led to the need for retrial because of indistinct testimony from key witnesses. Okay, so indistinct testimony. But you also need to focus here, okay? So it's not necessarily about all the other hassles. Like this should do it. Like this is the idea. They want it to be really accurate, and their focus is that their focus is on the records. The records needs to be perfect. They need to be accurate. Those were the examples that we were talking about, right? Like you need to be able to distinguish the noises, right? They don't care if the judge has to do more things or not. Their point is the notes need to be accurate. The court records, they need to be really accurate. That's like the main thing. So something that's going to address this issue the best would be D. I mean, need for retrial because indistinct testimony, meaning they didn't get accurate records, right? So indistinct testimony from key witnesses, which led to bad records. That's why they said, yeah, we need to do the trial again, right? So something that touches on the idea of records most directly. Okay, so that's why it's D. Okay, so this one, okay, what kind of question is this? So, I mean, it doesn't have a question. It's not asking for like, hey, look at the style and tone. It's not necessarily about that. What is this about? So, okay, then if we don't know, what are the three most common types that are difficult to spot? Okay, let's check if it's a modifier question. I mean, it could be, right? Method to make their study of, okay, so like, yeah, I see a lot of modifiers, right? You see what I mean? Like I see a lot of prepositional phrases and stuff. So you need to get the meaning down. You need to pinpoint the meaning, like precisely, okay? So let's take a look. Before we do this though, okay, why don't we take a look at the first paragraph? Because we need to know what their study is exactly in order for you to get at this answer. So let's take a look. On Earth, fire provides light, blah, blah, blah. Its creation by a process known combustion requires a chemical reaction. Okay, so combustion requires chemical reaction. The shape that fire assumes on Earth is a result of gravitational influence and the movement of molecules. So this is the cause. In the microgravity environment of space, however, combustion and the resulting fire behave in fundamentally different ways. Okay, so this is different than they do on Earth. Differences that have important implications for researchers. Okay, so I guess we're studying, yeah, you can see that in the title and you see that here. We're going to be talking about combustion in space, and then researchers are trying to understand this better. And then we have this, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the answers one by one. Let's take a look at A. A says, try to find a method to make their biofuel combustion study. Try to find a method to make their. What kind of, I mean, how did you solve this? Okay, why don't you guys close your, who chose A here? B? C? D? So, okay, you guys can open your eyes. You know that all the meanings are different here, right? So a lot of you chose C. Okay, so this is okay. It's hard to explain. Okay, so think about the meaning for a second. Okay, so they looked for a method to study. Method to study, right? Okay, is that exactly what they're trying to do? Method to study something. So okay, I really want to study something, but how do I study this? That's what C is, right? What about D? Sought a method to study combustion of biofuels. Well, no, I guess, I mean, it's all the same. Method to make their study. Okay, so I guess the meaning for this one would be different. A method to make their study. Well, it wasn't necessarily them trying to make their study. Method to making their study. No, I guess, I mean, these two are the same. I was wrong. Okay, so these two things exactly the same, except I guess this part, method to study biofuel combustion. Except this part is they're inverted, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, what about A? Tried to find a method to make. Okay, so it's not making a study. So method to make their study. No. So these two things are gone. It's either between C or D. Okay, then it should come down to this. Then, okay, so I thought it was going to be a modifier question, but I guess it's not. Okay, so it's looking for this versus this, and then this versus this. That's the difference. So would you rather say looked for or sought? I would say sought. Okay, whenever you're using an additional preposition, right? A verb and then a preposition, that's, you would rather use just one verb, right? Look for, I mean, sought is better than look for. What about here? Combustion of biofuels, biofuel combustion. This one doesn't really, yeah, I have a preposition here, but still, this would be preferable because of the verb choice. This is actually bigger. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer key, but I think it's going to be D here. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, next time I'll have the answer keys here. Okay, but it should be D. I think this is what they're asking for. You want to make your verbs more concise. So it's not C like you guys said. It should be D. Uh, 40. Okay, so I see a lot of commas here. So the thing that you need to think about is you need to think about essential versus non-essential here. Okay, so if I do this, similar to what is experienced, weightlessness, or wait, let's take a look at the full sentence. Could be accomplished. What? Is the previous sentence this? Okay, and then after that we have this. Okay, so starting from here, we don't have a subject and a verb. I mean, actually we do. On the plane ascent, passengers feel twice Earth's gravitational pull, but, is this a but? But for brief periods at the peak of the trajectory. Okay, so I guess we have a subject and a verb here, but we have a coordinating conjunction, so what's going to follow after that is going to be the subject and the verb. Okay, so the subject here is going to be weightlessness. Okay, so weightlessness. And then it's asking you, okay, so what can this be like non-essential? Can this be, does this need to be essential or non-essential? It's asking for that, right? So what you want to do is think about all the different answer choices. Okay, so let's just read this. I know that this is going to be our subject. Why don't we just get rid of all of this and just read this if that's okay. Weightlessness is achieved. Does that contaminate the meaning? Well, I don't think it contaminates the meaning. The meaning gets across, although we don't have a lot of additional information. Yeah, of course, if we say microgravity that's similar to what's experienced in space, then, you know, it elaborates on weightlessness, so that's good, but we can live without it. So it should be additional information, this whole bit. So you can put a comma here. What about here? Well, no, microgravity similar to, it's just modifying this directly. It's not, if you use another comma here, it's basically saying you can get rid of this. Weightlessness similar to what is experienced in space is achieved. Well, that okay, that one we don't have an answer choice for, right? So I guess it's just this, an answer choice that has this only. So that would be D. What? I can't hear what you're saying.
There's a comma after in the previous sentence where it says briefly it's at the peak of cloud.
Okay, which answer choice are you talking about?
Number 40.
Okay, which answer choice are you talking about? I can't hear what you're saying.
No, for like the whole sentence itself, there's a comma after category.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, it's yeah, that's this one is a phrase that comes before the subject and verb. That's okay. Okay? Okay, so when you have this, but you want to put a phrase before this, when you want to put a phrase before the subject and a verb, you don't necessarily need to put a comma here. It's just that you have the phrase itself and then you put another comma. It's like you're starting another sentence. Okay? But this question has nothing to do with that. It's asking for essential and non-essential phrases. Okay, should we add the sentence or no? Okay, so the scenario that I can imagine this being in the answer choice would be if it elaborates on the point. I mean, the paragraph starts here, so I'm just going to look at this sentence and see if this elaborates on this first sentence. If that's the case, yes. And also if there's a logical gap, yes, I can also have that. So let's just take a look. These flights allowed the UCSD students to experience microgravity. Okay, so these flights made them, from those flights we got microgravity. And then it says specifically, they investigated the combustion of biofuel droplets in microgravity. Okay, so I guess this is going into specifics. All right, so let's take a look. And perform their experiment without traveling into space. Yeah, why not? Why not? It is additional detail to these flights, and that goes along with this idea. They experienced this without actually going to space. They just kind of simulated that. So I would say yes, but let's take a look. A says yes because it elaborates on the advantage the students gained. Yes, it does, right? This is the relevant detail answer choice. What about B? Because it reveals that the students did not actually go into space, a point that the previous paragraph does not address. It does address that, at least indirectly, right? Because they say similar to what is experienced in space. So not B, A. So whoever asked this, were you confused between A and B, or? Who asked this question? Which one? A and B? A and D? Okay, let's take a look at D. No, because it restates what has already been said in the sentence. No, I mean, do you have this information? I think you were confused with the previous paragraph. But in this sentence, we don't have this idea, right? Them not traveling to space. We just said they experienced microgravity, but I mean, microgravity does not include that, meaning that they're not in space, right? Okay. Other questions? Okay, and a more important thing when you're doing the writing section, it's easy to just look at the questions. Okay, so wait, why don't you guys close your eyes? Who has so for the writing section, who has less than 5 minutes left? Like, for example, on last week's test, who had less than 5 minutes left? Okay, less than 10 minutes. Less than 15, less than 20. Okay, good. Okay, you guys can open your eyes. So if you have a lot of time left and you're still getting questions wrong, a lot means, by a lot I mean 10 or more. Okay, so if you have more than 10 minutes left, or at like something like 9 or 10 minutes, then you want to slow down reading more. Okay, I don't want to say, I'm not saying like you should intentionally aim to have 5 minutes left or anything, but you can afford to slow down more, especially in the reading, because if you're getting reading questions wrong, like main idea of the paragraph, or like which of the following best sets up the information that follows, questions like those, then you need to it means you're not paying so much attention on the passage itself, especially like, okay, so I guess this is the last part for this paragraph, but like even when you don't have many questions, you still want to read the parts, like, and especially the first paragraph. Especially when you're reading the first paragraph, you should pay very careful attention, because the writing passages are all very top heavy. It's going to introduce what's about to follow. Okay, so treat it like a reading passage. Okay. Okay. If you guys don't have any questions, we'll take a break. Go back to reading. Okay. I'll put the answers on the screen. Okay. Okay, so yeah, 35 was D. So for that question, it's about that verb. Rather than look for, you want to go for sought. Okay, so it gives us a definition of what democratic inversion is. Democratic inversion, okay, so we'll just call it DI. DI is a phenomenon that describes the rearrangement of living patterns. Well, I don't even know what they mean, living patterns. So that's what I'm going to find out in the passage. Well, you want to actually kind of get this down, okay? Great democratic inversion and the future of the American city. So I don't feel like it's going to be opinionated. I don't feel like there's going to be any kind of opinion. I think it's just going to give us information, tell us what some other scholars said, that traditional social science type passage. So let's take a look. So it says, we are not witnessing the abandonment of suburbs. Okay, so that's what I talked about yesterday, right? About suburban sprawl. You guys remember that? Okay, so we are not witnessing this. Okay, so abandonment of the suburbs is not happening, or a movement of millions of people back to the city all at once. Okay, so people are not coming back to the cities. That's what he's saying so far, right? The 2010 census, okay, so I want to box this, right? Whatever this says, certainly did not turn up evidence of a middle-class stampede to the nation's cities. What does stampede mean? Yeah, right? So when you're usually talking about stampede, you're talking about like a herd of like, wild animals just, moving. But it's in this case, it's just saying, yeah, in a massive scale, middle-class people moving back to the nation's cities did not happen. So what's happening here is we're talking about things that did not happen, right? So they didn't move to the cities, right? So from the suburbs moving to the cities, this did not happen, right? This did not happen. And then it says the news was mixed. Okay, so I don't know exactly what he means when he says mixed. So I want to find this out. Some of the larger cities on the East Coast tended to gain population. Okay, so I guess this is elaborating on what he means when he says the news was mixed. Okay, so larger cities on the East Coast tended to gain population. Okay, so gain population, albeit in small increments. Those in the Midwest, including Chicago, tended to lose substantial numbers. Okay, so I guess that's what he means when he says mixed, right? So some cities gained population, some cities lost population. Okay, right? So it's not so he says this originally, like, yeah, so it's not necessarily all the cities gaining population, like some gained population, some didn't, right? Okay, so it's pretty simple, right? So some gained and some lost, right? The cities that showed gains in overall population during the entire decade tended to be in the South and Southwest. Okay, so gains were here. But when it comes to measuring demographic inversion, raw census, okay, so here. So since we have a but here, I mean, this was all just information so far. I'm just taking this in. But starting from here, I guess it's going somewhere. When it comes to democratic inversion, census numbers are an ineffective, blunt instrument. Okay, so census, what's a census? Nope. Huh? Yeah, it's studying a population, right? That's what a census is. Raw census numbers are ineffective instrument. Okay, so this is the first point that he wants to make, right? So he says, yeah, if you look at the census, this was true, but actually, what he wants to say here is census is ineffective. Right? You don't necessarily know what's going on just looking at the census. It's not enough. That's probably what he suggests here. So this is the first point that you should keep track of, right? Let's go to the next part. It says, A closer look at the results shows that the most powerful demographic events of the past decade were the movement of African Americans. Okay, so results probably referring to the census results, right? Most powerful demographic events of the past decades were the movement of African Americans out of central cities and the settlement of immigrant groups in suburbs, often ones many miles distant from downtown. Okay, so these were the demographic events that were notable. He's just talking about this. And then central city areas that gained affluent residents in the first part of the decade maintained that population in the recession years from 2007 to 2009. They also, according to blah, 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 a study by suffered considerably less from increased unemployment than the suburbs did. Okay, so what is this doing? It's just giving us information here. I don't see his point. His point is not so apparent yet, right? The only point that he made so far is just this, and then he's just going on and giving us more information like this. So I don't know how to deal with this yet. I need to wait for his point. There needs to be a specific point. That's how I should take this information in, right? So you shouldn't be too caught up trying to memorize this information, trying to I guess if you want to organize it in some way that you want to, I mean, none of you do it, but I mean, if you want to do that, that's fine. But okay, so let's go to the next part, and I'm just going to wait till a significant point that he wants to make. Okay, so let's go to the next part. It says, not many young professionals moved to new downtown condos in the recession years because few such residences were being built. Okay, so all these different phenomena. And then it says, but there is no reason to believe that demographic trends prevailing prior to the construction bust will not resume once that bust is over. Okay, so well, what's a bust? What's a bust? Yeah. Yeah. So usually when you talk about when you talk about the economy, you say, oh, boom and bust cycles, right? Boom and bust cycles. Usually you have a few good years in terms of how the economy is going, and then you have a few bad years and that kind of thing. A bust is when it's not going so well. So when it says a construction bust, right? I mean, you don't necessarily need to understand it, but just to explain it, construction bust, I guess it's talking, yeah, there's not a lot of constructions going on, right? Will not resume once that bust is over. It is important to remember that demographic, okay, so if the passage tells you something is important, then it's important for you too. Remember that demographic inversion is not a proxy for population growth. Okay, what does it mean? It's not a proxy for population growth. I guess we have a semicolon, so if you don't know exactly what proxy means, you can find out here, okay? Let's take a look. It can occur in cities that are growing, those whose numbers are flat, and even in those undergoing a modest decline in size. Okay, so demographic inversion, it's not necessarily correlated with popular growth. I guess that's what he wants to say, right? So demographic inversion can happen in cities that are growing. It can happen here. It can happen here, right? So the two are not correlated. That's the point I guess he wants to make, right? Demographic inversion not correlated with population growth. So he's saying this is not the case, right? What are you doing? Like, what are you doing in class? Like, do you write anything down? Did you write this down? What are you doing? Why are you here? What have you been doing for the past like 2 hours? Did you annotate all your reading passages?
Last one, yesterday is what I read.
Yeah, let me take a look. What is that? Okay. America's major cities face enormous fiscal problems. What does fiscal mean? No, not tax. Yeah, financial. Okay. So America's major cities face enormous financial problems. Okay. So yeah, okay, by the way, this whole thing was just one paragraph, right? Okay, usually, okay, why do you have paragraphs? It's just saying, it's the author telling us, hey, this is one set of information, right? So what was the bottom line when it comes to the first paragraph? The only thing, there were a few points. I guess those that came after the but, right? So I guess the first one was raw census numbers are an ineffective blunt instrument, right? So that just talking about population, you don't really know, right? And that's what he was getting at. But the point that we eventually get at after the first paragraph is, that democratic inversion is not correlated to population growth, right? So why did he mention that census being an ineffective blunt instrument to begin with? Because he wants to get at this point, right? So you should, it's not you should, but it's good if you see that this entire paragraph all boiled down to this. And he was talking about a lot of different different phenomena and case studies to illustrate this point, right? Okay, let's go to the next paragraph. It says, America's major cities face enormous fiscal problems. So this is like a whole new idea, right? So we're taking a major turn here. We're not talking about democratic inversion or population growth anymore. We're talking about fiscal problems. Many of them the result of public pension. Okay, so it says results. So what is this? Okay, so what's the cause? What's the effect? What's the cause? What's the effect here?
Fiscal problems or cause and
Nope.
what follows it.
Nope. Did you even watch the videos? What's the cause? What's the effect? Yeah.
Fiscal problem is the effect of public pension obligations.
Yeah. Public pension obligations is the cause, right? This is the cause, this is what happens, right? The financial problems are the result, right? Okay. Okay, so you should take note of that, right? That cause and effect. And then it says some Chicago prominent among them simply are not producing enough revenue. Okay, so we're talking about Chicago all of a sudden, right? So that's just going to be detail supporting that previous point, right? About that cause and effect, right? How the cities are going to solve this problem, I do not know. Okay, so I guess the author's just, making a comment on this. He doesn't know how they're going to solve this problem. What I do know is that if fiscal crisis were going to drive affluent professionals out of central cities, it would have done so by now. But there is no evidence that it has, right? So what is it implying? That it should have driven affluent professionals out of cities, but it didn't. So it's not a cause and effect. I'm not saying that cause and effect we talked about, but he's saying it's, fiscal. If a fiscal crisis, if this was a cause and effect, it would have happened. But he's saying it didn't. So it's not. The fiscal crisis is not going to force the affluent professionals out of central cities, right? Okay, and then it says, the truth is that we are living at a moment in which the massive outward migration of the affluent that characterized the second half of the 20th century is coming to an end. Okay, so outward migration. So this is the suburban sprawl that we talked about yesterday, right? So the outward migration, right? The rich people leaving the cities, right? Going outwards, living somewhere else in the suburbs, right? That is coming to an end. That's what he's saying. And we need to adjust our perceptions of cities. Okay, so he says we need to do something. So this is probably going to be his prescription, something that's pretty important here. We need to adjust our perceptions. So this is what he's calling for, right? I mean, he talked about all these different things, and then it boils down to this point. We need to adjust our perceptions, whatever that means. I don't know what he means exactly. Adjust our perception is, right? What kind of perception he's talking about, what he exactly means by adjust, I don't know. I'm going to probably find out after this, but this should be your focus now, right? Much of our perspective on the process of metropolitan settlement dates, whether we realize it or not, dates, that's the, I guess that's the verb, right? Much of our perspective on the process of metropolitan settlement dates from a paper written in 1925. Okay, so E.B., this guy wrote something, and that's what our perspective depends on. Right? So this is probably going to, last part of the last paragraph, it said, okay, we need to adjust our perceptions. And then now he's explaining to us what our perception is, right? Where our perception comes from. He says our perception comes from this guy. And then he's probably going to say, hey, this is our perception right now, but we need to change this. We need to adjust this perception. Okay, that's where he's going to get at, right? It was B who defined four urban suburban zones of settlement. Okay, so these are going to be the four things: central business district, area of manufacturing, residential area, and then and finally an outer enclave of single-family dwellings. So these are the four things, right? So that's E.B.'s idea, right? But what is he going to get at? He's going to say, we need to change this perspective. This is rather outdated. I don't know. That would be inferring too much, but let's take a look. B was right about the urban America of 1925. He was right about the urban America of 1974. Oh, that's kind of weird. So he says, okay, so he was right during this time, but maybe he's going to say, but it doesn't apply to us right now. In the 2000s, it's not going to apply. Virtually every city in the country had a downtown, right? Okay, so I get what it is. It's probably going to talk about the four zones. It had a factory district, blah, blah, blah. It had residential suburbs and the upper middle class at the far end of the continuum. So this is all just talking about the four zones. As a family moved up the economic ladder, it also moved outward from crowded working class districts to more spacious apartments and eventually to a suburban home, right? So this is talking about that suburban sprawl that we talked about, right? The suburbs of B's time bore little resemblance to those at the end of the 20th century, but the theory still essentially worked. Okay, so theory worked up till a point, I guess, right? People moved ahead in life by moving farther out, right? So he's still explaining this guy's model, EB's model. And then he says, but, right? But in the past decade, in quite a few places, this model has ceased to describe reality. Okay, so now he's going to say, yeah, but now it's out of touch. Right now, the four zones, right? Four zone idea, that doesn't make real sense. It did up till a certain point, right? Up till a certain point, the four zone did make sense, but now it doesn't. There are still downtown commercial districts, but there are no factory districts. There are scarcely any factories at all. Okay, so, like potentially these can be the questions, like, oh, like what's the difference between back then and now, right? It can potentially ask you about that question. I know that question didn't show up, but stuff like that. There are scarcely any factories at all. These close-in parts of the city, whose few residents be described as dwelling in submerged regions of poverty, degradation, and disease, are increasingly the preserve of the affluent who work in the commercial core. Okay, so just talking about the differences, right? So this doesn't apply anymore. And just as crucially, newcomers to America are not settling on the inside and accumulating the resources to move out, they are living in the suburbs from day one, right? It's not necessarily them moving out, it's just that they start off there, right? Okay, so he describes all of this, right? Democratic, and then he gets to the point where democratic inversion and population growth, it's not necessarily related, right? But the point that he eventually builds to is we need to kind of adjust our perception, right? And in order to support this point, right, the very main thing is EB's model, right? The four-zone model that used to apply to America up till a certain point, but he says now that really doesn't apply, right? So that's the passage, right? Okay, so when you're solving question 11, you should specifically look for points in that first paragraph that's not information, but it's his points, right? So it's either going to be raw census data, ineffective blunt instrument, or it's going to be democratic inversion is not a proxy for population growth. Those 2 points, but I know that democratic inversion, not a proxy for population growth, was that main point. It is supported by raw census data being ineffective blunt instrument, right? So I should be looking for that, right? So if you're talking about the census, like A and B are, you don't necessarily need to look at that. What about C? Population growth and democratic inversion are distinct phenomena. There you go. They are not related to each other. Population growth in American cities has been increasing since roughly 2000. Okay, I don't know why he's talking about year 2000, right? That was not one of our main points. That's why it's C. According to the passage, members of which group? Okay, so this one, you just need to go back to the passage and you need to read carefully. That's what it's asking for. Can you spot certain details? Okay. So this one, members of which group moved away from central cities in large numbers in the early 2000s? Okay, so you just want to look for that year, early 2000s. So you're looking for early 2000s. You don't really find early 2000s, but you should come across this point. Past decade, right? When was this passage written? I think it was 2013, right? So when it says past decade, it should be this group, right? Or you can go backwards in this question. You can say, I mean, if you're, like questions like these, if it's taking too much time, you should come back to it later, because it's basically, because what happens when you're trying to solve this? Okay, so this is kind of like an advanced thing. I don't want to say advanced, but you're looking for all these in a case. where you're not so sure where to go back to, what usually students do is, okay, so was there an idea, was there a part that discusses the unemployed? Then you would look at this word and you would try to find this word. And then same for immigrants, same for young professionals. You would do that over and over again. It's going to take too much time. But while you do that, you're going to forget about the main points in your head. It gets erased pretty fast. I mean, if this, you can remember stuff pretty long, for a long time if we talk about it in class. But while you're taking the test, you forget about the passage really quick. So you don't want to do these like detail-oriented questions first, if that's the case, if it's taking too much time. You should move on to the questions that's talking about like EB and stuff. You need to move on to the main parts. So those would be questions like 16 or like 19, I guess. You know, some of the graph questions. I guess the questions aren't really hard. They didn't really ask you any hard questions. But let's take a look at this sentence. I mean, let's take a look at this question 14. Which choice best describes the current financial situation? So immediately when you see financial situation, you should be able to recall fiscal problems, right? Fiscal problems, and you look at this wording. Right? What are these? These are all cause and effects. So it's asking you about that cause and effect, right? So you just need to go back, confirm that cause and effect. What was the cause and effect? Pension obligations was the cause, and then fiscal problems was the effect, right? So B, right? Economic hardship due to promises. That's what pension obligation. What's a pension, by the way? Yeah.
Retirement.
Yeah, like the government pays you after you retire or something like that, right? When you're old, right? So that promises made in past years. That's a pension obligation. Obligation, promises made in past years. So B. And then, you guys know the answers for this passage, right? Okay, let's go to the next problem set then. Okay, so this passage. So what does it mean verifiable? You guys know the word verify, right? What does verify mean? Okay, so he says, my emotions are complicated and not readily verifiable. So he says, I don't know what to feel. I don't know what to feel about my I don't know how to feel about this. Like, I don't know what exactly I feel. I feel a vast yearning that is simultaneously a pleasure and a pain. This is in an elaboration on not verifiable, right? I am certain of the consummation of this yearning, but I don't know yet. Okay, so it's you should see this, right? It should be smooth sailing. Why? Because he gave you an anchor point to hold on to in the very beginning. He said, my emotions are complicated and not readily verifiable. I don't know what it is. And then he said, it's simultaneously a pleasure and a pain. He doesn't know what it is. I don't know what it will take since I do not understand, right? So all of this, right? So you shouldn't be too caught up in the sentences here. You should be looking for the next point. Okay, so I get that you don't know your feeling, you don't quite understand your feeling, right? For the first time, there is borne in upon me the full truth of what I myself said to the doctor. Okay, I don't know. This guy told something to the doctor only an hour ago. Okay, so what did he say to his doctor? That my motives in this undertaking are not entirely clear. Okay, so same thing. Same thing, right? So not entirely clear, not readily verifiable. I do not understand, all the same, right? Okay? So you shouldn't, like, your mind shouldn't be clouded when you read this. You shouldn't be like pain and pleasure. You shouldn't be thinking about those words. You shouldn't be thinking about, there are no other key words here. He's just saying, okay, so I don't know what to feel about myself. And then it says, for years, okay, so let's take a look starting from here. For years, well, this is something different now. Why? Because it's not about his emotions right now. His emotions right now, I know that it's not verifiable. Yes, that I know. But what about here? For years, it's talking about something in the past also. So this is probably going to be a new characterization, right? So this is our first characterization. I don't know what to feel about myself, right? I don't know how I feel. And then it says, for years, for a lifetime, the machinery of my destiny. Machinery of my destiny. So okay, so we've seen stuff like this. So it's an analogy, some kind of analogy, like a metaphor, right? My destiny has worked in secret to prepare for this moment. Okay, so my destiny has prepared me for this moment, right? Its clockwork has moved exactly towards this time and place and no other. Okay, so destiny has brought me here. That's what he's saying. So it's destiny. It's something inevitable that happened, right? Rising slowly from the earth that bore me and gave me sustenance, I am carried helplessly toward an uninhabited and hostile, or at best, part of the earth, littered with the bones of explorers. Okay, so this is him explaining what's actually happening to him. But we saw this in the prologue. I kind of skipped the prologue, but what did it say? Fictional Swedish scientists set out for the North Pole on a balloon, right? Okay, so that's what he's talking about, like leaving the earth and stuff like that, right? He's saying like he's flying out, kind of thing, right? And the wrecks of ships, frozen supply caches, messages scrawled with blah blah blah. So yeah, so he's saying, you know, this is my destiny. This is my destiny that I'm going to the North Pole, and these are all just details elaborating on his trip, right? The nature of his trip, like it's just, you know, like that's where I'm going, the North Pole, right? The uninhabited area. And then it says, nobody has succeeded in this thing. Okay, so I have a characterization for nobody. Nobody is the one who succeeded. So, well, I mean, you don't really need to take a look at it like that, but, you know, pretty straightforward, right? No one succeeded before. No one succeeded in this thing. This thing is probably him going to the North Pole on a balloon, right? And many have died. Okay, there you go. Well, pretty simple. Yet in freely willing this enterprise, okay, so that's how he wants to do this, right? So, okay, first thing, he doesn't know. He can't readily identify his emotions. And then he says, well, it's destiny that brought me to this point. And then he's willing to do this. In choosing this moment and no other, when the south wind will carry me exactly northward at a velocity of 8 knots, I have converted the machinery of my fate into the servant of my will. What does this mean? I converted the machinery of my fate into the servant of my will. What does the machinery of his destiny, of his fate mean? What can this refer to? I mean, it could potentially refer to the balloon that he's on, right? Because if it crashes, he dies, right? So that's the machinery of his fate, right? But what does he say? He turned that into the servant of his will. What's his will? To go to the North Pole, right? So he's using the machinery of his fate, something that his life depends on, to serve his will. Right, that's what he's saying, right? All this I understand as I understand each detail of the technique by which this is carried out. Okay, so he understands all the details. So he understands all parts of the balloon, right? So he understands the machine pretty well. What I don't understand, again, it's talking about what he doesn't understand is why I am so intent on going to this particular place. Okay, so here it becomes pretty apparent what he doesn't know, right? He's like, okay, I don't know exactly why I want to go there. Who wants the North Pole? What good is it? Can you eat it? Okay, so can you eat it? What point is this serving? This point is serving, I don't understand, right? It has no practical use. That's what it means. It's what a lot of Korean adults say, right? 먹지도 못하는 거, right? That's what he's saying, right? You can't eat it. Can you eat it? Will it carry you from G to M like a railway, right? He's implying, like these questions, it means it has no practical use. This trip has no practical use. The Danish ministers have declared from their pulpits their participation in polar expeditions is beneficial to the soul's external well-being, or so I read in a newspaper. Okay, so some people said, yeah, going on the polar expeditions, it's good for your soul, but whatever. It isn't clear how this doctrine is to be interpreted, except that the pole is something difficult so pole is something difficult or impossible to attain. So we have a characterization of that pole also, right? Going to the pole, which must nevertheless be sought for, because man is condemned to seek out and know everything, whether or not the knowledge gives him pleasure. Okay, so man condemned to seek out and know whether or not. So in either case, even if the knowledge gives him pleasure, he needs to seek it out. Even if it doesn't give him any knowledge, he still needs to seek it out. That's human nature. That's what he's saying, I guess, right? That's the cause and effect here, right? In short, it is the same unthinking lust for knowledge that drove our first parents out of the garden, referencing the Bible, right? Okay. So he's saying, yeah, I'm condemned to know, right? So he's thinking about why, and he's saying, it's not necessarily about pleasure. Whether or not it gives me pleasure, I am still condemned to just do it. Like, that's just the way I am. That's just the way man is. You want to seek out stuff, right? And then it says, and suppose you were to find it in spite of all, this wonderful place that everybody's so anxious to stand on. Okay, so suppose you do. What would you find? Exactly nothing, right? So he knows nothing is there. That's why he doesn't understand his trip. A point precisely identical to all the others in a completely featureless wasteland stretching around it for hundreds of miles, right? So it's elaborating on nothing. It's an abstraction, mathematical fiction, still elaborating on nothing. No one but a Swedish madman could take the slightest interest in it. Okay, so this is probably referring to himself. Here I am, the wind is still from the south, bearing us steadily northward at the speed of a trotting dog. Behind us, perhaps forever, lie the cities of men with their teacups and their brass bedsteads. Okay, so this is a contrasting idea with himself, right? He himself, he's trotting at a speed of a dog, right? He's moving at the speed of a trotting dog, but behind him are people who are living comfortably, right? And then he says, I'm going forth of my own volition. What does volition mean? Huh? Power? Yes, in this case it would be will, right? I am going forth of my own will to join the ghosts of Bering and poor Franklin. So I guess these are the guys who died there, of Frozen DeLong and his men. What am I on the brink of knowing? Okay, so I guess it's going to be important here, right? So I guess he comes to some kind of realization. I now see is not an ephemerical mathematical spot, but myself. Oh, okay. So he sees himself. Okay, well, what do you see in yourself? The doctor was right, even though I dislike him. Fundamentally, I am a dangerous madman. Oh, okay. It's this, right? So he comes to this conclusion, I must be crazy. And what I do is both a challenge to my egotism and a surrender to it. Okay, so yeah. So, okay, I mean, he does come to some kind of realization at the end, and that's what question 1 is asking about, right? So so in the very beginning, he says, hey, I don't know how I feel, right? But in the end, he comes to some kind of realization, and that realization is just that, oh, okay, I think I'm crazy, right? It's just in my nature, right? So, did we have fear? No, he wasn't fear. We did not have this. Doubt about his abilities. No, he was pretty sure about his abilities. Uncertainty of his motives, definitely. I do not know, right? That was the first paragraph. To recognition of them, there you go. Disdain, no. He doesn't have any disdain. He's just like, okay, well, nothing's there. Why am I going there? But that doesn't mean he was actually hating on it. Okay, this question, you don't need to, so sometimes, so on some of the tests, they ask you this. It's a focus shift question, right? It's kind of a shift question here, right? A to B, A to B, A to B, A to B. And then if they ask you a line reference, you want to pick the point where the second part starts, recognition of them. That should be what you choose for your line reference, okay? So, what would the answer for number 2 be? D. It should be towards the end, right? So, if you look at, wait, is it? Yeah, what I am on the brink of knowing, right? So he's starting to recognize something. So it's that second part of the answer to number 1. So it would be D here, okay? Okay, any questions on this passage? Okay, let's go to the next passage. You don't get any information from the title. So I guess in the beginning, you should be a little bit careful. And is there some kind of question that the author is trying to ask, or is he just trying to make a point? I don't know. So that's what you should be looking for. So in 1995, US News blah 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 posed the following question: if someone sues you and you win the case, should he pay for your legal costs? And then 85% said yes. And others got the question: if you sue someone and lose the case, should you pay his costs? Okay, so you should be able to see what's happening here. Because, okay, you have no idea what to expect, so you should be reading pretty carefully in the beginning, right? So what's happening here? So he's just switching positions, right? He's just switching the perspective, right? It's essentially the same question, right? Do you guys see that? It's the same question, right? Essentially. It's talking about a same situation. That's what I mean when I say same question, right? So, okay, this time only 44% said yes. Okay, so there's that difference, right? Even though we're talking about the same situation, just based on the fact that, like, which position you put yourself into, you make a different decision. I guess that's the apparent discrepancy. As this turnabout illustrates, one's sense of fairness is easily tainted by self-interest. Okay, so I guess this is the point that he wants to make, right? Sense of fairness affected by self-interest, right? This affects this. That's what he's saying, right? This is considered biased fairness. Okay, so biased fairness. So I guess he puts a name onto it rather than simple bias because people are genuinely motivated to be fair. Oh, okay. So it's not simple bias. So he's saying it's not simple bias. It's biased fairness because it's not like people actually recognize it. They want to be fair, but you know they just don't recognize their bias, I guess, right? Suppose the magazine had posed both versions of the questions simultaneously. Few respondents would have said, the loser should pay. Okay, so we're talking about a hypothetical scenario, right? Suppose they asked both of the questions. Few respondents would have said, so if I say few, what does that mean? Is it saying that there's going to be a number of people who say this? Is that what it means? Yeah? Just a number of people are going to answer this way? No. It's saying people are not going to say this. You guys remember the difference between few and a few? Do we need to do this again? What's the difference between few and a few? Woojin, what's the difference between few and a few?
A few is one and few is...
No. And what's the difference between few and a few? Who can tell me the difference between few and a few? I think we talked about this like 5 times also. What? Yeah.
Few is like a small number of people.
No.
Few is like nobody.
Yeah, just treat it as nobody, okay? Few means no. Few means negation. Same for little and a little, okay? We talked about this, right? If I say a few people want to go to your party, if I say a few people want to go to your party, that means, hey, there are some people who want to go to your party. But if I say few people want to go to your party, I want to emphasize that nobody really wants to go to your party. That's what's being said. So what about here? Few respondents would have said. So it's basically saying, hey, nobody would have said this. Nobody would really say this. That's what the author is trying to tell you, right? So this is an invalid statement. This is something that would not happen. That's how he's presenting this information, okay? The loser should pay if I'm the winner, but the winner should pay if I'm the loser, right? I mean, like who would, I mean, this is just being selfish, right? It's not being fair at all. This is just bias. This is probably simple bias. That's the point that he wants to illustrate, right? So if you give both of the questions to a certain person, you know, that person would not have said this. That's what he's trying to say. We genuinely want to be fair, but in most disputes, there's a range of options that might be seen as fair, and we tend to favor the ones that suit us best, okay? So we want to be fair, but we still want to choose ones that suit us the best, right? Choose options that suit us the best. And then it says, many experiments have documented this tendency in the lab. Okay, so we saw this in the lab also. The title of a Dutch paper, okay, so now I guess we're talking about a study, right? Dutch paper nicely summarizes the drift of these findings. Performance-based pay is fair, particularly when I perform better, right? Okay, so let's go to the next part, and then I guess this research shows up, right? So these people and colleagues illuminates the underlying psychology of biased fairness. Okay, so this is their study. In some of these experiments, pairs of people, okay, so this is just going to be the process, right? So you can make a choice. Okay, if you're confident in your ability to not get swayed and just take in all just the essential information, then I guess kind of read it, like speed up, yeah, but you can read it. But if you feel like you're going to be swayed by it and if you're going to be confused, you don't necessarily need to read it, but because you know what's going to happen. Okay, what's going to happen? They're going to be talking about, I mean, we know the result, right? People want to be fair, but they still have self-interest, and unknowingly they still infuse that self-interest into their decisions when they're choosing the options, right? Okay, so why don't we read this experiment? Okay, so they were trying to negotiate, and the details of the case were based on a real case. Okay, I don't care if it's based on a real case or not. At the start of the experiment, the subjects were randomly assigned to their roles as plaintiff and defendant. You guys know what a plaintiff and defendant is? What's a plaintiff? Yeah, the person who sues the defendant. The defendant is the one sued, right? Okay, so plaintiff and defendant. Before negotiating, they separately read 27 pages of material about the case, including witness, blah, 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 blah. So they had all the information, and then it said, after reading this material, they were asked to guess what the real judge had awarded the plaintiff, and they did this knowing which side they would be on. Okay, so I guess this is a key thing. They were given a financial incentive to guess accurately, and their guesses were not revealed. Following the subsequent negotiation, the subjects were paid real money in proportion to the size of the settlement. Okay, so yeah, they were paid real money, so I guess it was in their best interest to guess right. They genuinely wanted to guess right, right? With the plaintiff subject getting more money for a larger settlement, yeah, so if you do better, right? If you get a larger amount of money, you get paid more, and the defendant subject getting more money for a smaller one. The settlement could be anywhere from $0 to $100,000. The pairs negotiated for 30 minutes. All right, so I mean, a lot of detail. I mean, a lot of process here, right? As the clock ticked, and failure to agree after 30 minutes resulted in an additional financial penalty. Okay, so now we come to the results, right? On average, the plaintiff's guesses about the judge's awards were higher than those of the defendants. And the bigger the discrepancy, the worse the negotiation went. So subjects' perceptions distorted by self-interest. Okay, so this is the significance that it all boils down to, right? And this is something that you already expected to happen. We already talked about this in the very beginning. So this passage should go fairly quickly. I mean, they will ask you, I guess they will ask you questions about the process, but for those questions, you can come back later if you have to, right? What's more, these distortions played a big role in the negotiation. Pairs with relatively small discrepancy failed to agree 3% of the time. Okay, well, it played a big role, whatever. And then we get the number. In a different version of the experiment, the negotiators didn't know which side they would be on. Okay, so this is actually a different experiment starting from here, right? If they didn't know, right, what would happen? So I guess if we pull this out of the equation, the self-interest, then there wasn't that much difference, I guess, right? Blah, blah, blah. This dropped the overall percentage of negotiations who failed to agree from 28% to 6%, right? So they negotiated better, right? So that's the experiment. We did two scenarios, right? In one scenario, you would know which side you're going to be on, plaintiff or defendant. But on one of the experiments, you didn't know, right? And the one that you didn't know, you were less likely to be biased. Okay. These experiments reveal that people are biased negotiators, but more important, they reveal that their bias are unconscious. Okay, so this is the significance that we need to take account of, right? So they don't know they're doing this. Plaintiffs guessed high about the judge's award and blah, 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 Rather, it seems that knowing which side of a dispute you're on unconsciously changes your thinking about what's fair, right? Yeah. So it changes depending on which side you're on. It changes the way you process the information. In a related experiment, the researchers found that people were better able to remember pre-trial material that supposed their side. This is also another bias. These unconsciously biased perceptions of fairness make it harder for otherwise reasonable people to reach agreements, often to the detriment of both sides. This is the implication, right? So because of this, it makes it harder. This is a cause and effect, right? Unconsciously biased, so difficult to reach agreement, and it poses a detriment to both sides. And then we have this, okay? So 11. So I guess if you had to choose, I guess this question would be the most difficult out of it, just in this passage. I mean, even this question isn't hard, but okay, so let's take a look. The author implies that the survey would likely have produced different results had it given out the two questions at the same time, right? That would have changed stuff. That's what the author said in the very beginning, right? If you gave them two questions side by side, they would know what's happening, right? Oh, you're just switching positions, right? It's the same situation, but you're just framing me in a different way, right? You're just putting me in position A for this one, but you're putting me in position B for this one. But regardless, it's the same situation. Then, they wouldn't have, they would have tried to be more fair, right? So it's not a different group. It's not, why are we talking about an assumption? Discuss similar legal cases. No, it's just that frame the question in a manner that made a moral issue apparent. How would that be? What would that be? Yeah, giving them both of the questions at the same time. Then they would know it's talking about the same situation. Okay, questions on this passage? Okay, so this passage, this history passage should be a lot easier than the other history passages that we've been doing because it doesn't have a lot of content. It's all rhetoric. It's all rhetoric. There's not a lot of points. Okay, let's take a look. We are told that, okay, so somebody else's point of view. It starts off with somebody else's point of view, right? But who is we? I guess this is at the Anti-Slavery Convention of American Women, so I guess they are women and they are anti-slavery, right? Anti-slavery women. So people tell these people it's not within the province of women to discuss the subject of slavery, right? Okay, so some people say, hey, women, you shouldn't talk about the subject of slavery, right? So some people say it's not for women to discuss this matter, right? But she's probably going to have a counter argument to this, that it is a political question and we're stepping out of our sphere. Same thing. Okay, when we take part in this discussion. So this is the opponent's view, right? Women should not discuss this. It's not within it's not within your sphere to discuss this. It's not true that it is merely a political question. Okay, so starting from here is the counter argument, right? So she's saying, hey, it's not just a political question. It's something more than a political question. Notice, okay, so there's a fine difference between this not being, she's not saying it's not a political question. She's saying it's not only a political question. It is a political question, but it's something more, right? Political question plus, right? So that's what she's saying. She's saying, okay, it is likewise a question of justice, of humanity, of morality, religion, question which, while it involves consideration of immense importance to the welfare and prosperity of a country, enters deeply into the home concerns, the everyday feelings, right? Okay, so I think I get it, right? So I think we can just grab onto this, right? It's not just a political question. It's a question of justice, humanity, morality, religion. So why shouldn't we take part in this? So she's probably going to say something like that, right? So you should kind of start moving on, right? Whether the laborer shall receive the reward of his labor or be driven daily to unrequited toil. What does unrequited mean? Not what? Not returned, right? You can say unrewarded here. In this case, you can say unrewarded. Unrewarded work, right? Whether the laborer shall receive the reward of his labor or be driven daily to unrequited toil. So this is, these two things are in contrast. So in this case, you could say that. Whether he shall walk erect in the dignity of conscious manhood or be reckoned among the blah, 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 blah. Whether, blah, blah, blah. Whether. So all these questions, right? Okay, so all these questions. Should they be paid for their labor, or should they work for free? And those kinds of questions, these considerations are all involved in the question of liberty or slavery, right? Okay, so that's her point, right? So the opponent's view is saying it's not within the woman, it's not in the woman's sphere to discuss slavery. So it's not that. That's the opponent's point of view, right? But what does she say? Well, it's not just a political question, but it's also moral, religious, and whatever, right? So it's all of these questions. And she's saying there's a lot of considerations. So multiple considerations. And is a subject comprehending interests of such magnitude merely a political question, and one in which women can take no part without losing something of the modesty and gentleness which are blah, blah, blah? Okay, so she's asking, this question is attacking. It's a counter argument. May not the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit exist with an upright mind? Okay, so this is what the opponents say. Hey, women should be like this. Women should be like this. But she's saying, hey, I mean, yeah, this can coexist with this, right? Yeah. So I mean, yeah, you say women should be like this, but yeah, that's fine. But also, you know, I can have these qualities also, right? And must women necessarily be less gentle because her heart is open to the claims of humanity, or less modest because she feels for the degradation of her enslaved sisters? Right? So just because I feel sympathy for these people, does that make me less of a woman? That doesn't make any sense. That's what she's saying. So it's all included in what it means to be a woman. I'm not stepping out of my boundaries as a woman, even if I say, even if I speak on this matter. Right? Okay. By the Constitution of the United States, okay, I guess she's going to say what's mentioned here. The whole physical power of the North is pledged for the suppression of domestic insurrections. What's an insurrection?
Uprising.
Yes, like an uprising, right? Domestic insurrection, like what else to put it? Like a rebellion kind of thing. Like, I mean, rebellion could also be in insurrection, like some internal turmoil that happens within a country. Okay? And should the slaves, okay, so if the slaves, maddened by oppression, endeavor to shake off the yoke, the men of the North are bound to make common cause with the tyrant. Okay, so what if you don't have any historical background, this might be a little bit difficult to understand. This is referring to the Fugitive Slave Act. Who heard of that? Fugitive Slave Act? What's that?
It's like the slaves in the north side now they can like bring it to the south side. That the slave that escaped from the south, something like that.
Not exactly. It's part of it, but not exactly. People in the north have the duty to catch fugitive slaves. And they need to cooperate with the South in terms if the slaves revolt or something like that, right? So even though they are free states, they need to help the South with taking care of that issue, right? So that's what she's referring to here, right? So people in the North, right? People in the North, they're bound to make common cause. They need to stand on the same side with them, with the tyrant, right? The tyrant being the ones in the South instituting slavery, and put down at the point of the bayonet every effort on the part of the slave for the attainment of his freedom, right? So people in the North, they need to fight the slaves should they revolt, right? That's what she's saying, right? And when the father, husband, and son and brother shall have left their homes to mingle in the unholy warfare, right? So, yeah, you say this is irrelevant to me, but how is this irrelevant to me? Because my brothers, my son, and my husband, they need to go fight if a revolt happens. How is this irrelevant to me? You see what I mean? Okay. That's what she's saying. To become the executioners of their brethren or to fall themselves, right? By their hands. And it says, this is a quote, right? Will the mother, wife, daughter, and sister feel that they have no interest in this subject, right? So she's saying, yes, this is very, very relevant to me. This issue is very relevant to me. All my family is going to go fight them if a war breaks out, right? So it is relevant to me. Will it be easy to convince them that it is no concern of theirs, that their homes are rendered desolate and their habitations the abodes of wretchedness? Yeah, so this is something undesirable that she wants to happen. Surely this consideration is of itself sufficient, right? Yeah, just my people need to go fight them, like I said, right? To arouse the slumbering energies of women for the overthrow of a system which thus threatens to lay in ruins the fabric of their domestic happiness, right? So this can potentially destroy our domestic happiness. And she will not be deterred from the performance of her duty to herself, her family, and her country by the cry of political question. So it's not just a political question. It's just that my family needs to go fight should this situation break out. So that's why we should be able to speak on the subject of slavery also, right? But admitting it to be a political question, right? So now she's making a different point, right? So she was making the point that it is indeed a relevant point to her, right? But now he's saying, yeah, okay, so fine, let's say that it is a political question after all. So, okay, let's say even if it is only a political question, have we no interest in the welfare of our country, right? Yeah, so even if it's just a political question, I still have a stake in this because I should care about the welfare of my country also, right? May we not permit a thought to stray beyond the narrow limits of our own family circle and of the present hour, right? So again, just a rhetorical question repeating. May we not breathe a sigh, blah, 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 blah. Again, a rhetorical question. Must we witness the headlong rage or heedless folly with which our nation is rushing onward to destruction? Do I just need to watch my country rushing into destruction? That's what she's saying, right? Even if it is a political question, I still have a stake in my country. I care for my country. It matters for me also, right? Shall we silently behold the land? Okay, I think I get it now, right? Shall we silently behold the land which we love with all the heart, warm affection of rendered a hissing and a reproach through the world by this system, blah, blah, blah. And okay, so finally, and then she says no. Okay, so she asked all these rhetorical questions and then she says, no, the events of the last 2 years have cast their dark shadows before, overclouding the bright prospects of the future, right? So yeah, we've had some negative impacts and shrouding the destinies of our country in more than midnight gloom, and we cannot remain inactive. We should not remain inactive. So she's saying, yeah, we need to do something about this. We cannot do this. Our country is as dear to us as to the proudest statesman. And so our country matters to us as much as the country matters to the politicians, right? We also have a stake in this country. And the more closely our hearts cling to our altars and our homes, the more fervent are our aspirations that every inhabitant of our land may be protected in his fireside enjoyments by just and equal laws. Yeah, so we should also strive for just and equal laws and blah, 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 okay? And still be onward. We should go on, right? Okay, so lot of repetition here. There's not a lot of points, right? So the main points were, okay, so starting off with this, right? So yeah, some people say it's just a political question, but it's not only a political question, it's something more than that. And then she makes all these rhetorical questions saying, yeah, it's still going to affect us because our families, our friends are gonna go to war if a slavery revolt happens. So it matters to us. And even if it is a political question, it still matters to us because we also have a stake in this country. So it matters to women, this issue of slavery. So us being anti-slavery is justified and we should do something about it. That's what she's saying to the people at this convention, right? So we know the audience, right? She's talking to the people there who are likely to be mostly women, right? Okay. Okay, so if you have any questions on this passage, we'll go over the questions tomorrow, okay? For this one. And for homework, do the next passage sets. But really, especially for writing, okay, by the way, I don't mean, when I say annotate the writing passages, I don't mean for every single sentence circle the key phrase. Do that only for parts that you need to. You know where those parts are. If you have a sentence order question, if you have an add or deletion question, if you have a main idea of the paragraph, right? Like I saw your passages and it's just like you're just circling everything. Like I don't even know what like it just looks so bad. Okay? And for the sentence structure questions, do it. Same for transitions. I mean, ideally what you should be doing when you're doing homework is you should be identifying the question type for each and every one of them. I mean, right next to the question, you can say, okay, so I mean, this is a modifier question, right? I mean, you can at least take notes like that, okay? You should be able to recognize. I mean, okay, fine. If you're doing it unconscious, if you're doing it but you're not writing it down, that's okay. But you should be doing it for each and every question. You should be identifying the question type, okay? And tomorrow, okay, those of you who went out today, I'll send you. Okay, you guys need to send me an email though, if you want to watch today's class. Okay. Send me an email, okay? I can't send you if you don't send me an email, okay? So those of you who left, send me an email. I'll send you the link to today's class, okay? But for tomorrow, if you don't do it, you're leaving again, okay? Do it, especially for writing, okay? Okay.